The first time in 12 years, voters in Allston-Brighton elected a new district city councilor recently. Compared with some other parts of Boston, District 9 has a reputation for being a home for voters in transition with lower turnouts. But in contrast with the election for councilor in 2007, the number of votes cast on November 5th was higher by almost 40%. Our guest has been following the race as a writer for DigBoston. We'd like to welcome Olivia Deng. Thank you very much for being with us again, Olivia.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, talk about what you think might be changing in the district to have higher turnout in this year's election compared with 2007 and so many more people voting. What's going on in Allston-Brighton?
Yeah, I think that anyone living in the district or even just walking through it can see that there have been a large number of new developments. The businesses that were there a decade ago are no longer there, so a lot of changes in terms of what new housing is up, what new businesses are up, and also the population as well.
Now, I think 12 years ago, one of the big issues was the closing of the Presentation School. It was a Catholic school near Oak Square. What has happened to the neighborhoods? I mean, has this continued to erode this sort of family base, or is it maybe turning the other way now with more people coming in and staying in this neighborhood?
Yeah, I think that there are definitely a lot of people who are not necessarily like families who are living in houses, but they definitely do want to stay in Allston-Brighton and have expressed their interest in staying, but cannot because it's becoming increasingly unaffordable. And the new development projects like Lantera and Continuum are just simply out of reach for a lot of people renting in the neighborhood. And this kind of trajectory is threatening people's ability to stay, even though they want to.
Tell me a little bit about the two finalists in this election, because you have one who's a lifelong resident, worked for a state rep, and you have another longtime resident, community activist. What about these two people? Yeah,
so there are some key differences between Liz Breeden and Craig Cashman. Craig Cashman is definitely more entrenched in politics when it comes to like state politics than Liz is. But Liz Breeden is more of a community activist. Upon moving to the neighborhood, she became involved in like environmental groups, LGBTQ+ groups, and has been a part of like civic associations. So she's definitely more like the grassroots community-oriented candidate.
Well, you also watched this election before the preliminary in September. Was there any movement of either the other candidates who were running up behind these two to maybe throw their support? Was there anything like that you were able to notice? I think I've definitely witnessed some support of people who have previously run and like actively pushing for or maybe, I'm not sure about formal endorsement, but have definitely thrown support behind some candidates and initiatives that they're supporting. You also moderated one of the forums in this race. Anything you notice about differences between the two finalists in that forum?
Yeah, I think that one of the key things about the forum that me and Brandon Bowser moderated, which was made for renters, was that when it came to talking about affordable housing and the housing crisis, both of them acknowledged the issue. Their solutions and understanding of it, I feel, differed. So Liz talked about expanding the inclusionary development, which sets aside a certain number of units for affordable housing in developments. And I believe Craig was more bent on talking about building more housing on parcels of land. So those were some specific differences that came up in the forums. And also I feel like there are differences when it comes to how they answer questions about policing and also displacement. So I feel like Liz was more adamant about the displacement issue.
Well, Liz Breeden won with almost 58% of the vote. I mean, I personally, I wasn't looking closely at this, but I was a little surprised that somebody from an activist background would win by such a margin over somebody from that more normal, conventional political background. Were you surprised at all yourself?
Yeah, I mean, at first I kind of didn't know what to expect because it seems like establishment candidates have the money and they are more entrenched in the system. But I feel like given what happened in the preliminary election, like there were some grassroots candidates like Breeden, Bowser, Lee Nave, and a lot of people threw their support behind them. So if those people like rallied behind Liz this time around, then I think it makes sense that she would win.
What I also noticed about Liz Breeden was that she had support from one of the main groups fighting for more steps to curb displacement in Boston's housing market, whether that's rent control or some other measures. What do you think is going to happen? Because she's joining a council, there are other people with a similar orientation. So what does that mean next year, you think?
Yeah, I think that going forward, it'll be very important for Liz she came up with some good policy points during her campaign, but I think that it will be good for her to make herself available to constituents, work with the many activist groups and neighborhood associations like Allston Artists Impact, which has advocated for artists and artist housing, Allston Civic Association. There's so many other groups, but I think that going forward, working with these people who have been doing the work for decades or like years in the neighborhood would be really important in curbing the displacement problem.
Well, you've met both of these candidates. Anything you'd say about their personalities, the way they come across in the community?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like both of them are very friendly and approachable, or like they seem friendly and approachable and receptive. I think that when it comes to personality, they're both like warm, but what's important is like the work that they've done and what policies they have.
Of course, another thing that's happening here is that, and this is getting beyond just District 9, for the first time in the history of the city, we have a council taking office in January that's going to be majority female, majority people of color. So what do you think that means?
Yeah, I think that it's great. I think that it's great that voters elected this council that's not just white men. And I think it's good to see a council that represents Boston's population. So Boston is what you call a majority minority city. So seeing that kind of representation on the council is definitely going to be very important and could motivate more people to be in touch with the councilors who usually may seem like unapproachable, but I think that this is a good change.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Olivia Deng from DigBoston.